Angie, how's it going?
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, me too. Me too. We were talking, and this is always the story. We were talking before we hit record, before we went live, because this is a webinar. All the good stuff happens there, but I want to share with everybody because, Angie, your story is so interesting and frankly, really unique. I think in the content creator and kind of podcasting space. That we have some amazing stuff to share with folks on the webinar today. We'll record this and send it out afterwards, so folks who aren't able to make it today can still benefit from it. But I'm really excited to get into your story, share kind of like the rebranding experience you recently went to, like kind of some things that led up to that. And then so what? And what we're doing from here, or what you're doing from here. Because I think that paints the whole picture. But I'll just say for folks on the webinar today, as you're coming in, Angie and I want to make this really conversational, and Q&As are 100% welcome. So in the right sidebar of your window here, there's a little place to ask questions. Just pop in there, ask a question, or you can just hop into chat and just fire away. And we probably will just stop what we're doing and answer questions, because this is not for us. This is for y'all. And so we want to be here to serve however we can. Cool. All that being said, Angie, you want to introduce yourself and your podcast and kind of where you come from and what you're up to these days?
Sure. That's a lot. My name is Angie Griffith, and I have a podcast called Podfluencer Society. Up until April 18th, it was called 4 Things for Your Podcast. So you may recognize it under that title. But I actually come from the music business, and I don't know how far you want me to go down that rabbit hole, but yeah, it was a decade in the music business that led me to podcasting.
And you're in Nashville, right?
I'm in Nashville, Tennessee. Yes, I've been here for about 15 years.
Cool. So I think music really synonymous with Nashville. I lived there for, I went to college there and then spent 4 years afterwards there. So yeah, definitely.
Really?
Nashville. Yeah.
Where did you go to college?
I went to Vanderbilt.
Okay. I went to Belmont. Yeah. So I was really jealous of your football team. I actually transferred to Belmont.
Not much to say about our football team.
But the fact that you had one, okay? Because I was I did my first 2 years studying the music business at a college called Columbia in Chicago. And I thought to myself, why am I studying the music business in a city where there's no music business? Unless I want to do jazz music, I need to get to Music City. And so without even really knowing much about Belmont at all, I just knew it was one of the best music business programs. And I was so excited because I was coming from a private school that didn't have sports teams. And I was so excited to transfer to a bigger school solely for having a football team. And then I get to Belmont and I realize there's no football team. And so I would go to the Vanderbilt games, but it just isn't the same. That is my biggest regret, is where I went to college. No shade to Belmont, but it wasn't the full college experience, you know?
Yep. Totally get it.
Yeah. But that's cool that you lived here.
Yeah, no, it's a great town. Really, really love it. We go back to.
And where do you live now?
We're in Providence, Rhode Island.
Oh, okay, cool. I've never been to Rhode Island.
Yeah, it's fun. But yeah, so I'd love to. I know I asked a lot of who you are and where you come from and stuff, but you rebranded your podcast, which is what we're going to talk about in kind of the main part of the webinar today. But I think it's important to have folks understand where you came from to get to this point. So do you mind sharing just a few minutes of a little bit of your story and kind of what led up to the impetus for you feeling like you needed to make a change in your podcast?
Yeah. So like I said, I come from the music business, and for the majority of my career, I was an artist manager. And when someone hears me say I was an artist manager, it seems so glamorous, because you watch these shows like Entourage and you look at E and you're like, oh, they just hang out and party all the time. But it could not be further from the truth. As an artist manager, you have the most demanding job of anyone on the artist team. It's a 24/7 lifestyle career, no days off. I don't think in my whole 20s, I ever turned my phone off once, because it just wasn't allowed. I couldn't. And so eventually I started to think to myself, why am I working 24/7 to build someone else's empire? That just didn't commute in my brain. And I know in a lot of different industries, people can relate to this feeling of just why am I busting my butt to make somebody else's dreams come true when I have dreams of my own. And so I started to consider leaving the music industry, which is a tough decision because I did work really hard to get to the position I was in, and I put in a lot of dues. I made no money, and then I finally get the salary that I deserve. And I'm like, okay, I don't want this anymore, you know? And so I started to consider like, what else can I do? And I'll try to make this story as short as possible, but one of the first meetings that I took was with another manager in town. So he was like at my boss's level, owner of the company. And he had been wanting to build out a brand partnerships division, which for anyone who's not familiar, it's a department where you connect your artists with brands. So like to do campaigns, like a Nike campaign. And so we decided we were going to do this together, build it out. It was the perfect solution for me because I was going to get equity in this division and not have to go fully on my own, not have to get investors. And what was really crazy is in one of the last meetings we had, he said, "Hey, Angie, like both of us have these huge networks in the music side of things. Like between the two of us, we can get in touch with the team for any artist in town. But like, as far as the brands, this is a new territory for both of us. Like we don't have relationships with the head of Nike or Coca-Cola or all these big brands. So do you have any ideas for how we can start creating these relationships?" And I was like caught off guard, but I wanted to give some kind of answer, but I hadn't thought about it. And I was almost like embarrassed to say it, but I was like, well, what if we, just like start a podcast and we interview the heads of brands. And then that way we're slowly but surely building up a really strong Rolodex because we're creating these strong relationships with them, but not needing something from them right away. And so he was like, "Whoa, that is brilliant. Like, do you know how to start a podcast?" And I was like, "No, but I'm an artist manager. That is my job. I can figure out anything." So we came back together 3 weeks later. And what I had realized in that 3 weeks was you can't start a podcast based on what the podcast can do for you. You have to start a podcast building a brand that would actually draw in an audience so that the head of brands would want to come guest on your podcast. And so what I ended up doing was creating this whole concept of a podcast. I did a mock title, cover art, trailer episode, interviews. Like I went all out. Like I did a whole photo shoot. I mean, it was wild what I got done in these 3 weeks. And I come back and I sit him down and I was like, "I just need 20 minutes of your undivided attention so I can just show you this." And so I presented this concept to him. And at the end of that meeting, he was like, "Angie, what do you think about scrapping the brand partnerships department? And what if I just sign you as my first ever podcasting client and I give you your current salary plus bonuses? Would you be open to that?" And I was like, "What the heck?" Like this does not happen. Like a management company signing another manager, like it does not happen. The closest example is Chrissy Metz from This Is Us was an agent and then she was an actress in This Is Us. But like I literally have never heard of it before aside from that. So I was like so excited, like on cloud nine. And then we both thought about it over a couple days and we were like, you know what? Like relationships are everything in entertainment. Like we don't want to burn any bridges. We don't want to like step on anybody's toes. So it would be the right thing to do to go offer this opportunity to my current company. Even though I was like, they were going to be like, "Angie, LOL, like good luck." But no, like we support you and we appreciate you asking, So I go to LA, I'm sitting down in front of all my bosses at this big fancy conference table and I share with them this idea. And they ended up saying, "We'll give you your current salary plus bonuses, plus you get to keep your assistant." And I was like, okay, like not the answer I was expecting at all. So went back to the original guy. We both agreed, what's meant to be will be, like, go do your thing, and I was moving forward with that plan. And at the time, as an artist manager, you usually are managing 1 to 2 clients at a time, maybe 3. But I usually had my one legacy act, which is like a legend in the country music space who's been around for years and years. And that was where the majority of my time was spent. And then I had a rotating act, which was like a more baby act or like a smaller act on our roster. And so the smaller act was really easy to transition because there was an associate manager who was about to be promoted. So that was great. And then the legacy act, I knew that was going to take some time because the week that we signed him was the week I started with the company. So he had never had another day-to-day manager at our company. Oh, wow. So like nobody knew his systems like I did. And so I knew that. And so it was like this perfect kind of situation where half my time I'd be working on him, half my time I'd be working on this podcast project. And then eventually I'd be going podcast full time. Well, then the pandemic hits. And for a music management company, I mean, we had other departments, but the majority of our income came from tours. So we're pulling down stadium tours, arena tours. I mean, no money on the books, negative money on the books. And so obviously it didn't make sense for us to start this risky, fun podcast project. It wouldn't have made sense for anybody, not even the first guy, you know? So we kind of just decided, hey, in the meantime, we don't know what's going to happen. So stay on, you know, your client, obviously. And then in the meantime, all of the managers who were fortunate enough to keep our jobs, were tasked with finding new business, which was new to us because as managers, the agents bring us the deals, you know, and then we say yes or no. So to go find new business and be a salesperson was very new. And so what I did along with one of the founders of the company is we built out a podcast division. And so during that first year of the pandemic, I was able to sign some really cool deals, like a network deal for one of our clients, and then launched a podcast independently for one of our music clients. I also was kind of under the radar practicing on my own podcast because it was like a dating podcast too. Like I didn't want anyone to find it. But I was like, I can't be sitting here advising the wives of these huge touring acts about their podcast that they want to have when I've never had a podcast before. And like, you can't expect me to do that. So I kind of like broke the rules, did my own thing on the side. But also like I had to, because I had to learn what I was doing very quickly. But during that first year, I learned so much about podcasting because what I, again, was really fortunate about was I had this really strong email address. I could get a meeting with anybody I wanted. And I really took full advantage of that in that year. And I had a meeting with everybody I could and met everybody I could, and built some really great relationships. And then after, you know, the pandemic kind of was settling down, we were putting back up all of our tours. I was like, you guys, I'm not going back to touring. Like I quit 2 years ago.
I'm good, thanks.
Let me part ways. And so essentially what I did was kind of took that department with me. Obviously everyone, you know, great relationship still, but took that department with me, which was a really great kind of cushion because that was a retainer client, you know, one of our music clients. We had launched that podcast together. So that was a good little cushion to get my business started. And then that's when I started building my own brand, my own business in podcasting. And at the time, I didn't really know what that was going to look like. I knew I wanted to build my own brand and I knew I wanted to have the podcast of my dreams one day. But at the beginning of my journey, I just knew that I needed to make money. Like I needed to get money on the books. And so the podcast that I started originally, 4 Things for Your Podcast, was started just to have something in the podcast apps so that if someone were searching how to start a podcast, they would find me, they would download my freebie, they would enter my funnel, they would buy my products and services, and then blah, blah, blah. And so when I first started it, I thought of it in like 5 seconds, just threw it together. I'm like, 4 things for your podcast. Great. In 4 minutes or less. I'll just do quick 4-minute snippets once a week. That'll be so easy. And what I realized is like, because it wasn't something I wanted to be doing at all, and it wasn't anything that was actually driving me business at the time either, because nobody knew about the podcast, right? It was literally just this extra line item on my to-do list that was excruciating. And so about 6 months into doing those 4-minute episodes, I was inspired to just be like, listen, it's never going to be the right time to start the podcast I want to start. I just need to go all in on this one and just see where it goes. And so that's when I started to do like full length episodes, and I brought on my first guest, and then it really started to like fall in line from there. And then, we can talk about how the rebrand came into play, but like background, that's the background.
Yeah. Gotcha. No, that's super helpful. I mean, I think that the intentionality you're talking about is really important, and it's really hard for us to know what we want to be intentional towards, or like what the end goal is when we're just starting, because it's going to change. Like it's inevitably going to change, like our most popular podcast is called Audience. is so different now than when I started it like 3 years ago. Like it was kind of like what you're talking about. It's like, hey, this is a behind the scenes look at like what it really is like growing a podcast was kind of the pitch. And that was cool for a while. And then like kind of said like, gosh, this is not like super helpful to most folks. And so we kind of we kept the name, but repositioned the existing, brand as like, helping podcasters like improve their craft is how I'd say it now. And it's like really, really, really well done. I'm not the host anymore, thank God, because Stuart on our team is so much better than me. But like, anyways, I think that like the lesson here that I would try to like abstract away is like, just like someone put in the chat, like the most important thing is just to start, right? And when you start learning, and that's like the highest fidelity feedback loop that you can have, because you can sit and pontificate and plan and survey your audience and all this kind of stuff. Literally none of it matters until you hit record and publish your first episode, and then you start getting real feedback on real content from real people, not just like a little impromptu focus group or something like that. So that's super interesting.
And it's not always even about the feedback from people. Like I realized through doing what actually brings me joy to produce and what actually drains me. And when I first started my podcast, when I first started my entrepreneurial journey in podcasting, I thought I'm going to be the go-to girl for how to start a podcast. I'm going to have the best course. I'm going to be the best mentor, the best coach is what I thought I was going to be. And then actually in practice, I was like, whoa, I do not love teaching people how to plug a microphone into their computer. I don't love teaching people how to hook up Dropbox. Like I learned through doing that I actually enjoy much more serving the existing podcaster, the one who's already started podcasting, who already knows what they're doing, but who just wants to like level up. And I didn't think that was going to be me. I thought about it and I really didn't want to do that at the beginning. But then I realized like, that's where my talent is. That's what I actually thrive in. Like, I love doing it. And it's just, I would have never known.
I think it's so important because like your energy is like infectious, right? So you obviously like have really strong connection with like kind of who you are and what you're talking about and the people you serve and how you're doing it. And if that's not all consistent, it's so obvious. Like there are people who are trying to shoehorn themselves into this place and be a person that they're not yet. Yeah, and I think that's important. And it's just so obvious, and we're all like our BS meter is really tuned to seeing some of that. So I think that's a really good lesson for me. Well, one thing I wanted to talk about is like in kind of doing some research on you for this event is kind of like where you are in your journey. And I would maybe say it as like you're a podfluencer in progress, maybe is like what I would say. Like I think we all hear a lot of, oh, if you just publish every week and create content and learn how to market it and stuff, then you'll make a bunch of money and be able to quit your job and all this kind of stuff. And like that might be true, but like it's not that easy and it takes a freaking long time. Do you want to share with folks a little bit of like where you are in that journey, and like some things you've kind of like realized along the way?
Sure. I think most importantly to discuss is like, I come from a career where I was building huge brands, like positioning. People don't realize this, but when an artist gets huge and they blow up, there's a lot that is strategically done behind the scenes to position them to be perceived a certain way by not only the public, but also by record labels and like pitching artists that you believe in to a record label so that they believe in them, so that therefore they'll put money behind them and they'll market them and they'll put them on a radio tour and like all of this positioning that goes on behind the scenes. So when I started my journey in podcasting, I was coming into it being like, I'm going to be the exception to the rule. I know how to like position things. I know how to sell things. Like I'm going to go from zero to successful in no time at all. And then on top of that mentality, I was thinking, I'd also been listening to all of these amazing podcasts by these gurus like Amy Porterfield. No shade to these people, but like Amy Porterfield and Russell Brunson and Jenna Kutcher and all the OGs. And I give them credit. They have worked for a very long time and they are successful for a reason. I'm not discrediting that by any means, but they also started podcasting in the glory days of podcasting where it was a lot easier to get discovered. And their journey is just different than it is today. Like what worked for them isn't going to work for somebody most likely today. Now, of course, they're evolving their processes and they keep getting better and changing as well, just like everybody else. So I'm not discrediting them, but it's just different. And so when I came into this, I was like, well, if Amy Porterfield says it's so easy to make 20 grand a month selling a $300 course or whatever it is, then I can figure that out. No problem. I've been listening to her podcast for a year or two at this point. Like, I got it. So I come in and it just wasn't at all what I expected. Like, I consider myself to be a very smart person, but the reality is any brand that you build takes time. Like, you have to be a person of interest with an audience. Not necessarily, you don't have to, but like in my experience, you need the numbers to make that kind of money with the things that I was trying to make money with, such as a course or a membership or anything high ticket even. Like, I did it all completely backwards. I came in ready to scale because that was the end goal, to scale my business. But I should have come in working one-on-one with premium private clients to figure out, how do I serve, what works well, what works repeatedly over and over that I can scale. But instead, I put all of my time and energy behind creating this one high ticket membership that took me forever to create. I poured my heart and soul into it just to realize that nobody wants to pay high ticket for how to start a podcast, because you can Google that in 5 minutes these days. Like, it's just not what people want to pay high ticket for. And so I wish I would have known that going into it. If I can give anyone any advice, like, do not try to scale right off the bat, even though it's so tempting to do so. But I actually don't have any scalable memberships right now because I've gone back to basics, just figuring out like, what is it that I actually can offer that's scalable.
Yeah. I love that. I think one of the things we've seen, because we've done the same thing. We've had courses available. We have a done for you service that we've had for years. It's how I got into the business. We call it Castos Productions. And I still think it is the highest value thing that we do. You know, our hosting platform is amazing and all this kind of stuff. But I think that like offering a done for you high touch service is still like just so valuable. You know, ChatGPT and AI are not going to replace the high fidelity working with the human that has a ton of experience in the space. And so like, I think a lot of people, you hear Russell Brunson and, whoever, Pat Flynn, amazing people, right? I've learned so much from all of them too, but like they're playing a different game than most of us, I think is the reality. Like, as we're getting into entrepreneurship and online business, like the best thing we all probably can do is just sell our time. Because like, it's something that is relatively unique and defensible. If you just really, really care.
But it's so hard because it like everyone wants this passive income that we're all sold, and it's all sold to us like it's so easy because that's how they sell things. They sell like, if I do that, I could do this, you could do this, no problem, And like, I get that, it's sales. But at the end of the day, like what you don't see is the 15 years that somebody spent testing and trying and learning and finally,
or as a consultant, right? Like before they started this. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. You had a quote from a recent episode that was, a powerful brand is nothing more than a collection of opinions. I don't know if you like came up with that on the fly or you had thought about that beforehand, but that's a really great quote, I think. Like, I'd put that on a t-shirt. Like,
isn't it?
Can you tell me what that means to you?
You have no idea how powerful that was for me. And it was like a God thing that I even heard that quote. No, I did not make it up. I heard it I randomly discovered this random podcast. I could be wrong. You're catching me off guard. I think the podcast is called Big Brand Energy. I could be wrong. I said it in the podcast episode though. But I discovered this podcast. I listened to one episode. They said that one line and I was like, yes. everything clicked for me because we all think like we need to serve everybody and we need to please everybody, especially in this day and age that we're in. We're all scared to say anything that's going to get us canceled or anything that's going to like get somebody who's been in the business longer than us, trying to like push us down and like discredit us. And there's all these fears that you have. And so when you get in, especially with something like a podcast, it can be very tempting to just be vanilla and try to please everybody. And when you try to please everybody, you're going to end up pleasing nobody. And so this concept of a powerful brand is nothing more than a collection of opinions is so true because like your opinions are what either draws people towards you or repels them from you. But either way, you are creating something that is unique and that is unlike anybody else, anything else. And so therefore, those who love you really love you. And you can build a really loyal fan base. And there are people that have really strong opinions that a lot of people hate, but a lot of people love them and they do really well. And it's also way more fun as a content creator to be able to be authentically yourself. Obviously, being respectful, of course, like there's a line. But like to have your own opinions, even if they go against the grain, I think is really strong for a brand. And it's something that's very difficult to do. But like it's something this year, especially going forward, I'm really intentionally doing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, love it. I think, as I'm not a brand, but Castos is a brand. Like for us to have a position is really important. And we try to do a lot through like our product and design, like within our hosting platform. And try to take a stance there, and then through our content, like try to have that. I try to have a brand that's, I like to say I'm like a pretty blue collar podcaster. Like I have an $80 mic and I have $20 lights and a webcam, and like it just doesn't need to be any more fancy than that. And I think it's what we say more than kind of how we look and everything.
Yes,
is a bit how I try to approach that. But I digress. So I want to hear all about the decision to go from 4 things for your podcast to Podfluencer Society. Like obviously, like I think I understand the impetus or like the stimulus for like making the change, but like logistically, like changing the name and the cover art and announcing it on the episode you did, and the things you did along with that launch, like the kind of the done for you service or the consultations that you're doing now. Like walk us through like things you maybe not the whole process, but like things you learned, good and bad, through that process. I think those lessons learned are always like super helpful.
Yeah, a lot there.
Yeah.
Well, for anyone who's not familiar with why I rebranded, let me just back up a little bit. So I started, 4 Things for Your Podcast with this idea that it was not going to be my forever podcast. And so as I started to make those longer solo episodes and bring on guests, I needed some way to make 4 Things for Your Podcast still work. And so at the beginning, I was asking my guests beforehand, I was saying, hey, we're talking about this topic. Come prepared to just recap it with your 4 takeaways on that topic. Like, what are your 4 biggest pieces of advice for the audience? And then I started to feel like that was putting way too much work on my guest. Like they were already giving their time showing up. I was giving them homework. And so someone suggested to me, hey, Angie, why don't you recap your 4 takeaways at the end? Because that also then positions you as the authority and not always handing over the authority to your guest. And so I thought that was a brilliant idea. But again, it was like another line item on my workflow. I'm a 1-person show. I'm running a business, running a podcast, like, but I was like, it is what's best for the show. So yes, I need to start doing that. So I started recapping my 4 takeaways. And every single time I recorded one of those recaps, I hated it so much. Like I was why am I doing this? I'm literally just trying to fit myself into this box that is this title that I created for myself. And eventually one day I was like, I'm not doing it anymore. And I'm just going all in. This is the podcast of my dreams. I'm going to make it what I want it to be. And I was like, over the past 2 years of doing 4 Things for Your Podcast, I've discovered who I'm speaking to. Because again, at the beginning, I thought I was speaking to the aspiring podcaster. But through recording episodes, I realized, no, I'm speaking to the person who is out there building a brand and a business with their podcast at the center of everything. And the term that I coined to kind of describe that person is a podfluencer. And a podfluencer doesn't mean that you are already successful and you are making a ton of money and influencing the world. Like, no, a podfluencer is building the brand and business of their dreams. And so I kind of just like, I really honed in on that one term. And then that same day, I was like just going back and forth, like Podfluencer podcast, Podfluencer Society, whatever. Landed on Podfluencer Society, immediately started filing the trademark. Like it was like, sometimes you just, when you know, it's like finding your partner,
Yep.
like when you know. So I just like immediately went all in. And then I came out, I wish I should have looked at the exact timeline, but it was less than 60 days later, I announced and launched the rebrand. And then when you ask everything that goes into it, like there's so much. But also keep in mind, like, I am a perfectionist. Like, I am type A, nothing falls through the cracks. I'm a former artist manager. Like, that is how I was trained.
Yeah.
So the first thing I did was I made a decision that I was going to take advantage of this rebrand to have another opportunity for momentum around the podcast. Because what I could have done was just kind of worked behind the scenes and then all of a sudden just flipped it and said, surprise, it's now called Podfluencer Society, which would have been easier for sure. But I was like, why would I not treat this as I would like a real podcast launch and just try to get more eyeballs on my content and try to like get more listeners and just breathe a new life into this brand. And so that's what I did. I created a checklist that turned into a timeline, counting down till the launch day with everything I had to do. It ended up being like nearly 400 line items. Checklist wise, because and I'm not trying to scare anybody because it was so worth it. But again, like you have to think like, okay, I'm changing the name of my podcast. And so that affects the name of my business entity, which affects the name of my bank account, which affects the name. Like I have to file for a new trademark and I have to change my email address. Like all of these things that like seem so small, but they're all like little things that need to be updated. And then in addition to that, I was like, well, the most important part of all of this, aside from making sure it all, cohesively looks great together, but the most important thing for all of this is the marketing and the promotion behind it. Because if I'm not doing any marketing and promotion, then what's the point of trying to take advantage of this momentum? And so I had to get really real with myself and just come to terms with the fact that like I literally did not have the hours in the day to spend any time on marketing. And so I reached out to a friend, Lauren Passell of Tink Media, who is just this phenomenal, like the best I've ever met in podcasting publicity wise. And I brought her on board to help me to get this exact thing that we're doing here. Lauren connected you and I.
She's amazing. Yeah.
It's amazing. And she set me up with some podcast swaps, some amazing guest interviews, just the things that I didn't have the time to do. And I'm just so grateful to Lauren and like her relationships. And then I was doing whatever I could on my end too, marketing wise. So like I submitted for feature placements in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher. I didn't get any of those, but submitted. I reached out to every single guest that had been on my podcast, asking them to help support the rebrand launch. I went to all my friends in podcast, like friends who have podcasts about podcasting and who are in the podcasting industry space, requesting, feed drops on their shows, if I could guest on their shows. I just did everything I could possibly think of that I had time to do. And then at the same time, which you didn't even ask me about this, but I think it's important, is I also thought it was a great opportunity to pitch for a sponsorship because this momentum with a rebrand, especially considering I was putting effort for all of this publicity surrounding the rebrand, that is something that's very sellable to a brand. And it's worth a lot more than just regular episodes that I'm putting out, especially at my download numbers, which are not huge, by the way. And so that was something that I really hit the concrete running really hard on too. I probably reached out to about 30 different brands, sent my pitch, negotiated, and finally landed on my amazing presenting sponsor who came out with this relaunch with me, which is Beacons, which is the link in bio tool that you see if you go to my Instagram. It's Beacons. They're amazing. It's way more than a link in bio. They have like an email software platform, like media kits. I mean, it's so cool, and I'm just so grateful to them. But it was a lot of work to get there.
Yeah. No, I love it. I love it. So like the one thing that really stands out to me from all of that is like you have all this momentum behind the rebrand. And it is like more even than like launching a new show, because you already have the history and the brand and the equity with your audience of the existing show. And then you're rolling that into a new thing. And I think it's so smart to like go pitch sponsors. It's like the perfect time to pitch a sponsor to come on and say like, hey, I'm doing a ton of work and I'm like doubling down on everything I already just did with this new brand. And I think like offering your new kind of consulting offering at the same time is so smart, right? Like line everything up with this as like a product launch, if you will, if you're in like the software or the info market space. Like it's not just changing the name in your feed. It's like this is a whole new thing, and we should treat it like that. But it's not just new, because we have all this momentum behind us already. Yeah, I love that. Did you make any mistakes? Anything that now you're like, oh, man, I wish.
Yes.
I wish I wouldn't have. Whatever. Yeah,
I'll give you
love to hear it.
My one big mistake and then my one tiny mistake.
Okay, great.
So my big mistake is, and I'm sure your audience may know this already, but it's actually very easy to submit for a feature in Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Stitcher, and it's just like an Airtable form. You fill it out, whatever, you submit it. How I submitted was, hey, I just want you to know, like I listed out all these marketing efforts. I mean, down to buying a billboard. I mean, I listed everything I was doing, all the shows I was guesting on. And I was just like, surely they're going to see that I'm taking this seriously and they're going to want to support the announcement of my podcast launch. I was coming out with 3 episodes on the same day. I mean, I had it dialed, and I sent a really thoughtful, really nice, like well-worded pitch for myself. But what I didn't do was present the opportunity as a co-marketing opportunity. So what I didn't do when I pitched Apple Podcasts was say, hey, I will drive all of my traffic on the week of my announce to Apple Podcasts if you agree to feature me on this date. And I would have done that, but I was moving so fast. I didn't think about it. I didn't think like, what would Apple want to hear from me? And I could have, done the same thing with Spotify, but unfortunately I dropped the ball there. So nobody featured me, but it's fine. What's meant to be will be. And then the little mistake I made is like, again, I've like dialed, everything is written in my timeline. Everything is in my calendar, scheduled. I didn't consider the day of my actual launch, my announce, like that went public, when my press release goes out, everything happens. I didn't factor in any time to respond to people. So I ended up this whole day that I had planned to be continuing, working and like building more momentum. It felt like my birthday. Like I'm so grateful that like everyone was texting me, calling me, reaching out to me, congratulating me, featuring me in their, tweets or whatever. And I'm having to like reply to comments and DMs and stuff like that. And my whole day was just shot. So like, if you're going to go out with something like that, plan for it to be like your birthday and just like relax and just deal with that.
Yeah, I love that. I definitely wouldn't have thought of that. So that's
yeah.
Like, helpful. Yeah. I'd like to kind of circle back to your original kind of vision was you're gonna build a brand and sell these like high value like info products and stuff like that, and like I understand that like that's not and like cater to new podcasters, and now you're saying like, hey, I only want to work with like existing established podcasters and help them kind of elevate their game. Like what does that look like for you today? Like what's your product that you're trying to sell like at this point?
I think I'm still figuring it out. Like I am just 2 years in. Like they say a business is built in like 5 years. And I really believe that now. Like I thought I knew, I don't know. I'm just taking aligned action and seeing where it leads me. I don't want to say I don't at all work with new podcasters or aspiring podcasters. I do, but what I've done is I've released this pressure to create like a course, like a beginner's kind of flagship offer. And so I've kind of just stripped all of that away. And I said, hey, I offer a consultation package that you can use for anything you want. And if you want to pay me for an hour of my time to teach you how to start a podcast, I'm glad to do it, but I'm just not keeping up with a course, if that makes sense. Because things move so quick too. Like you put together this course and the next thing you know, ChatGPT comes out and changes everything. So yeah, so I do have like that. And then as far as like what is really giving me life right now is the whole monetization thing, because I have so many friends in podcasting who are leaving so much money on the table because they just don't know that they can be making money. Like somebody looks at, for instance, my download numbers. I mean, I'd have to look because my hosting platform is Spreaker and their back end is just like a little wonky. But like, let's just average. Let's say I have like 175 downloads an episode at this point. There's no reason, if you're just looking at download numbers, that I should be getting paid what I'm getting paid by my sponsor, but it's all about the package that I put together. And it's all about why it makes sense for both of us. And then that aside, like that's really creative. That's time intensive. Like that is just, unique, but I want to teach people how to do that. But then on the other side, it's like, I'm also not leaving any money on the table because I'm taking advantage of programmatic ads, which are, for anyone who's not familiar, it's just those 30-second ads that sound like radio ads. As a podcaster, you just put your markers in your episode and then it's filled based on whatever inventory. And at my download numbers, I'm making like $20 a month from that. Like it's almost not even worth your time, right? But like the reality is at any moment, my podcast could blow up and I'm not going to leave a penny on the table. And now I go back and I look at my influencer friends who have been podcasting for 3 to 5 years, who have huge download numbers, and they didn't even know that was a possibility. And now I get to say, hey, I started this podcast network. Let me bring you onto my podcast network. Let me teach you about monetization. And what's really cool is like the deal I kind of negotiated with the hosting platform with Spreaker and iHeart is I don't even take a cut from my podcasters' money. Like all of my negotiated income comes from the hosting platform and like the sponsors themselves. So it's the best of both worlds for all of my friends who want to start monetizing. And it's just really fun for me. Like I love getting to help people make money because at the end of the day, you can say you're passionate about your podcast, but like I want to make money and most of my friends want to make money too. And it's just really fun.
Yeah, no, that's cool. That's cool. We've recently launched programmatic ads within Castos, and yeah, it's transformative. I mean, we've turned it on for one of my old podcasts that we haven't published a new episode in like 8 or 9 months, and we're making dollars a day from content that's just sitting out there, and people are listening, and so I think it's just so cool, and yeah, that's one of the biggest reasons we think programmatic is so cool is. One, it doesn't have to be all you do, right? You can have a kind of statically stitched in like mid-roll or something, and then just have dynamic pre and post, or any kind of combination there. So it doesn't exclude host-read ads, I would say, but it covers all of your inventory forever, and you don't have to do a thing. Literally, you just push a button in Castos, and you say, "I want ads," and we serve ads. And so, yeah, I think it's enormous for the smaller brands. And I don't mean to like demean you, but I would put myself in that bucket too. Yeah, we have a couple hundred downloads an episode when we were kind of really going. And to one, just not have to publish anymore and still make money. Amazing, right? Like the only analogy I have in the creator space is like YouTube. Like you could do that. Like if you have a successful YouTube channel and you stop publishing, it's still going to serve those old videos for some time. Yeah, I think it's great. How do you square that with like your main sponsor and like host-read ads? Do you obviously disclose to them, hey, we're going to have programmatic ads like around your stuff? Do they like give you a hard time, or is like your deal that you negotiated with them affected by having programmatic ads in your show too?
Yeah. So no, they understand. Obviously, I have programmatic ads in my podcast, but they are the presenter of the podcast. So basically, what I packaged was, hey, you get your logo on the cover art. You get a mention at the beginning of every episode saying you're listening to the Podfluencer Society podcast, which is brought to you by Beacons, the #1 link in bio tool used by over 2 million creators. Okay, that's at the beginning of every episode. They get a mid-roll or pre-roll host read ad that rotates. And what I do is and I'm still testing this. I might not do this for our next term, if we resign or if I have another sponsor for my next term. But what I'm testing for this term is I'm actually baking in the host read ads for my presenting sponsor. And then my programmatic ads are all inserted dynamically. And so I'm about to turn on Apple Podcast subscriptions. And so another selling point to my presenting sponsor is you're going to be the only sponsor heard for all of my subscribers, which is pretty cool. Because they understand in the podcast episode in general, there's going to be other sponsors in there. So it's actually a selling point. And then what else? Yeah, we do mention in the newsletter. Every time I send out a newsletter about the podcast, their logo and the mentions in there. I do tag on social media whenever I post about the podcast. Obviously, like, as I mentioned, I purchased a billboard as part of my marketing strategy, and their logo is on my billboard.
That's awesome. How much does the billboard cost, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah. And so Nashville has like a unique situation.
Such a baller thing.
Yeah. Like, so everyone would have to see in their own town, like what's available, or like wherever you're trying to market, like what billboards are available in that area. But for me, it wasn't about the billboard itself. It wasn't about the people driving past it. Like nobody's driving their car being like, oh, I need to listen to that podcast. Let me stop and follow it right now. It was more about the picture, which sounds so millennial, but like it's more about the picture because positioning, it positions you as, oh my gosh, you have a billboard, right? So I just got the lowest package. It was 30 minutes on a rotating screen. So in total, had screen time for 8 minutes on this billboard, but that's all I needed to take a picture. So I paid $250 for that. And it was probably the smartest move that I made. And I didn't think it was going to be, but it ended up being because it was my highest engaged social media post on every single social media platform. It got me covered in Pod News, which is the biggest podcasting newsletter, I believe, a second time. So they had already covered my rebrand, but then the next day they have this segment in their newsletter called Podcasts in the Wild, where if people see like a billboard or a magazine ad or something. And so they covered me a second time, which was amazing. And just the amount of inbound people coming out of the woodworks, all because of that one photo. I'm talking like industry people, people that wanted to collaborate with me, people from high school, all of a sudden being like, oh my gosh, you're doing so well.
You must be famous.
Happy for you. Yes. And I'm like, you don't even know. I just paid $250 for 8 minutes on a rotating screen just to take a picture, but thank you.
That's a good hack. I mean, I've heard similar things, like depending on where you get it, what time of day and everything, like they're quite affordable, even like in big cities. Like they can be quite affordable.
And I want to say it was in the middle. I mean, beautiful location, like the most high traffic, amazing spot ever. So like that was really cool too. But
yeah, that's super cool. I think we're getting up on time, but like the one last question I want to ask is about like pitching Beacon, right? Your headline sponsor. Like
Beacons.
What kinds of things went into that like packet and that presentation that you presented to them? Because I think this is something that we talk to our customers about and I'm like, hey, you're gonna have to like put your sales hat on. You're obviously not scared of that, but like a lot of folks are. So like I think it's intimidating to them to say like, do all this stuff and design all this in Canva and blah, 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 blah. Like try to, if you can, just like give us what went into that getting ready to make that pitch, I guess.
So I don't want to make it sound, again, I'm not trying to be one of those gurus that's like, it's so easy. If I can do it, you can do it. Like I truly like a decade of experience being in artist management for most of that time. Like I have a background and experience in like these kinds of things and packaging things, right? So yes, deals were incoming for us, but I still had to make it make sense for the brand. Like they wanted to work with us in some way. And it was a lot of times up to us as managers to figure out how we could make it happen, right? So I don't want to like discredit that and like make it seem like it's so easy. And that's a big reason why I have a service helping people to structure their pitches, because I realized that it doesn't come easy to most people. So the first thing I did was I figured out what is the package that I'm taking to market. Because you can't just be like, oh, I get this many downloads and my podcast is really cool. No, you have to say, look, you're going to get this, and it's going to cost this much. And then you negotiate from there. So when it comes
Sorry,
to
let me stop you there. Sorry. When you say it's going to cost this much, do you tie that to downloads or anything like that? Or is it just straight up like, you're a brand that aligns with me and my audience and the things I talk about, and we're not going to talk downloads at all? Or is it
no,
like, these
it's very much so based on downloads, reach, Instagram, like anything I have that's an asset that I can sell, I put it in there and I figure out what's fair for both of us. And then for a title sponsorship, that's a full brand integration. So I upcharge from there. So I'm like, hey, this is how much it would cost if you were just getting ads in my podcast, but you're a full brand integration. So I get to upcharge for that. And so what I do is, I put together a package, and I mean, this is no secret. Everyone who goes into a negotiation, you're going to start high, right? And you know you're going to negotiate down a little bit. So I always start high, but I know the threshold where I'm not willing to go under. And so I start high, and it may sound crazy, the number I ask people, but then they haven't seen the deals I've seen with other podcasters and musicians, and it's like they don't realize what's possible, and like they don't realize how much brands actually have to spend, and so they're scared to ask for it. But I think that the package that I put together is highly valuable, not necessarily because of the download numbers, but like I said, like I am working really hard on my podcast. There's a chance it could blow up tomorrow, and you're still going to lock in that rate for the whole term. So like it is a risk, like on their end, but it's also a high reward on their end. But I know also I know myself as a creator, and I know that if I say I'm going to deliver on something, I'm going to deliver on it. That's also something too. You have to hold yourself accountable. If you promise all these things to a brand, you actually have to do it. And so I trust myself to do that. So I trust myself to charge higher. And then also when it comes to beacons in particular, that's another thing I don't want anyone to take for granted is like selling to a brand starts with actually creating a relationship with the brand. So you can send cold pitches all day long, but I will tell you 99.9% of the time, you're going to spend all your time trying to get a response from someone. So I had been talking to beacons for about a year prior to that, like just getting to know them. I had calls with them, like trying to figure out a way that we could work together one day that would make sense. And their team loved me. And that was the case for a couple different brands. But again, you also have to say like, okay, what's the season? What are all these brands' budgets at this time? Are they looking to invest in a podcast at this time? And with Beacons, kind of all the stars aligned. And I pitched the package, and then we negotiated. They asked for a little more from me. And then I, brought the price down a little bit. I mean, it was just a true negotiation, but like it was the best kind of like partnership. Like we both just wanted what was best for this situation. Yeah, it was really, really healthy. And like, I'm so happy with it.
That's awesome. I want to leave time for the question. We have a question in the chat here. How do you balance your creative control of your content versus sponsors wanting a say in quote editing your content and guests? Does your headline sponsor have any kind of creative control of your content?
No. And I'm very clear in that. But here's the thing, I don't have like controversial content, and like so it's not really an issue. But no, in my contract, I made sure to say like I have full creative control. That said, I would always be respectful. And there's always going to be a clause in a contract that says, hey, if our values start to not align, like you can pull out. Like obviously that's just being a good partner. Like nobody's going to like hold you hostage. But no, they don't have any say. And honestly, they probably don't even listen to my podcast. Like, I don't think they're going to come back.
Well, they have a lot of trust in you if that's the case. Because they've obviously invested a lot. That trust is got to be there.
Yes. I think that has everything to do with it. It's just like trust in the creator. I would never pay a creator that I don't trust. Like the reason I would pay a creator, and I've advised brands as well. I've been on both sides, and like I've advised brands to pay creators high ticket because they're worth it, because like their content is consistently good. Like why would they start putting out crap content because they got a sponsor. Like if anything, they're just going to be motivated to put out even better content. At least that's the case for me.
Yeah. Love it.
Yeah.
I guess my last question would be like, so folks that are hearing this are like, man, this is great. Like I'm going to put together a pitch, deck and bundle and everything. I'm going to go start building these relationships with potential sponsors. Like what's the first step that someone could take? If they're starting from like, I got a podcast, I got 50 episodes, I got a couple hundred listeners, I got a reasonable like email list and social media following and stuff like that. Like what are the first kind of 2 or 3 steps someone should take to say like, okay, I'm going to go from hearing Angie talk about this to like being solidly on my way to having like a legit sponsor?
You will get so much more confidence once you package what you have to take to market. And I know you mentioned a deck, but I strongly suggest just a 1-page. Like everything you need to convey can fit onto 1 page because you hyperlink things. If they want to click on something, they can get more info. But like you have to figure out what assets do you have to offer and how can you package that in a way that looks attractive to like a brand that is targeting the audience that you're speaking to. And then once you package it, don't put so much pressure on yourself to get a sponsor right away, but more so just start making relationships with brands. And like me, that's a huge priority for me because I have a network now where like I want to be able to have really strong relationships with a bunch of brands and like bring money to my podcasters. Like that's a dream of mine. That is like end all be all for me. And so I just want to like go, I'm actually trying to figure out like, where do brands go? Like, are there conventions? Like, I know where to find podcast people. I can go to Podcast Movement, Podfest, whatever. Yeah. But like, where do the brands that you're targeting, where do they hang out? Like, do you need to go to like a beauty conference where there's brand vendors everywhere? Do you need to go to like a motocross conference if you're like a, motocross podcast? Like, I don't know, but like, go meet the brands and like form relationships and you would be shocked at what you can put together. But it all comes down to packaging your product in a way that makes sense to them, which you can't overlook.
Would you be able to share your 1-pager with folks?
Yeah. How do I?
So how about this? You and I can coordinate offline and we'll put a link to it when we publish this to our YouTube channel.
Or what I would rather do actually is I could just drop a link to, I have a service where I can actually create this.
Perfect. Yep.
Because I can talk about it all day long, but the reality is like, it all comes down to knowing what to put on there and what's important. Like what's on my 1 sheet isn't the same as the 1 sheet I created last night for one of the podcasters on my network. It's just 2 completely different shows. We're highlighting 2 completely different aspects of our podcast and like what we have to offer. And honest to God, every single podcast is going to be unique. So I'm just going to drop you that link.
Awesome. That's huge. Yeah. I mean, I can tell you, like I've been in this industry for 8 years and this is one of the biggest like black box intimidating things that any creator can do. So like your service is hugely valuable for folks that are wanting to take that next step and take their brand and their podcast and kind of put it to the next level. So awesome. So podfluencerproducts.com/pitch.
Yes.
Awesome. Angie, it's amazing. Thank you so much. For folks who want to learn more about you, obviously, podfluencersociety.com for the podcast. It sounds like podfluencerproducts.com for kind of your services. Anything else or anywhere else that people can kind of connect with you?
Yeah. Like you said, podfluencersociety.com is the podcast. And then actually podfluencerbrands.com goes to my Beacons landing page that it's always updated with current products, current services, freebies. Everything is at podfluencerbrands.com. Awesome. And thank you so much for having me. This has been such a fun conversation. I hope it was helpful for somebody.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. It's amazing. Thank you so much. So folks who, I guess if they weren't told to call, they won't get the recording, but this will be recorded. We'll send an email out shortly with a link to the recording so y'all can kind of reference back to it. And it'll be on our YouTube channel in about a week.